Hey, welcome to Gradwell, a limited series podcast that explores various ways the University of Michigan can support its graduate students in their journey to greater well-being in our everyday lives. Brought to you by Rackham Graduate School. This season, we'll be talking to members of our academic community whose research intersects various dimensions of well-being. I'm Sam Hobson, a PhD candidate and a GSSA in Rackham's Professional Development and Engagement Office. My fellow grad students, it's time we start placing as much importance on ourselves as we do our work. You're worth the effort.
Creativity is really about, it really takes us to the heart of what it means to be kind of a fully alive human being.
Hello. Today's resource is Ed Sarath, Professor of Music in the Department of Jazz and Contemporary Improvisation here at Michigan. Professor Sarath is also the founder and co-director of the cross-campus Program in Creativity and Consciousness Studies. And it is this focus that we will be highlighting in today's episode to explore the intersection between intellectual and spiritual well-being. I'm super excited to have y'all with Professor Sarath and me today. Let's jump in. Professor Ed Sarath is a composer, performer of the flugelhorn, author, scholar, and change visionary whose work traverses wide-ranging areas within and beyond music. His compositions for large and small ensembles have been performed worldwide and interweave diverse genres and approaches to the improvisation-composition interface. His books include Music Theory Through Improvisation, Black Music Matters, Music Studies and Its Moment of Truth, Leading Change Through America's Black Music Roots, and Improvisation, Creativity, and Consciousness, the first book to apply music principles of an emergent, consciousness-based worldview called Integral Theory to music. Hi, Professor Sarath. How are you doing today? Thank you for being here with me.
So good to see you, Sam. Really looking forward to this.
Me too. Okay, so Professor Sarath, how did you get into this academic focus?
Well, it's very interesting because it's I always make jokes. It's like I'm at two kinds of academic fringes. One being in music, but within music being in jazz and improvised music. Okay, so we're at the outer edges of music studies. Every university has some kind of music activity, but most of those are oriented towards European classical. So people in jazz and improvised music, they're at the edges there. In that, the area of consciousness studies is really kind of a newcomer. It's really beyond the fringes because now you're dealing with the intersection of spirituality if it's done with depth. So, but it's an emerging academic field, and I've been involved, as an outgrowth of my longtime practice in meditation and interest in topics related to, consciousness and spirituality. Now there's kind of like academic movements, you might say, around contemplative studies, consciousness studies, and that sort of thing. And of course, all these things are connected to well-being. But so my journey has been a little bit, I came in sort of a little bit through the back door, and the back, the entryway is expanding, but it's still, at the fringes, and I enjoy it. And it's a challenge making inroads, but I've managed to do a few things.
Thank you. To lay a foundation for our listeners, what is creativity?
You're starting with the big ones. It's one of my. It's funny. It's one of my favorite questions, but it's also challenging. So I usually start with most people's everyday understanding of creativity is not a bad place to start. People usually think of the arts, creating a painting. Somebody's creating a sculpture, and music. Somebody's creating a piece of music. And then from there, you realize that there are different kinds of creativity, even within the arts. And again, I come back to jazz. Jazz is really great because you have improvisatory creativity, and you also have compositional creativity. So the improvisatory creativity is actually most of the music made in the world, not necessarily not in the academy, but in the real world. Every culture across the world has music, really strong improvisatory components where the music is, significant parts of it are made up on the spot. This is very different than European classical, at least in modern times, when the music is composed and notated, and players actually don't improvise as they did at one point in the classical tradition, but improvisatory creativity has kind of fallen by the wayside in that realm. So we have, even with the arts, you have like a wide range of creativity. And then there's emergent interest in the fact that creativity really applies to all academic disciplines. The sciences, mathematics, sociology, engineering, business. I've lectured at the Harvard Business School in their graduate program on improvisation as it applies to business. They're very interested in jazz. The business world is. So creativity is really about it really takes us to the heart of what it means to be kind of a fully alive human being. Because really, when you look at it, like everything we do is creative. And we think now we see, we're at a political moment. There's a lot of activism happening now. That's an amazingly creative kind of endeavor. So really creativity is kind of like, I think about it, we dig into our reservoir of human potential, and human beings, we make things. Everyday life, we can engage in any given moment, even if we're doing housework or something like that, in more or less creative ways. It's a big area.
I have so many questions. So I like what you said about how everything that we do in academia, creativity is sort of tapping into what it means to be human, but that everything that we do in academia is a creative process. I don't think that's necessarily, it's framed as such. Oftentimes because it's a science, and science is so linear and serious, and creativity is so artsy and flowy. And therefore there's this distinction in sort of the cultural narrative that what we do as graduate students, as scholars, is not part of the creative process. Knowledge production is not part of the creative process. And so to think of it as that, what do you think that reframe can do to the things that we're able to create and to say and to put out into the world as academics?
I mean, this is huge. You're really hitting it on the head. And this, of course, will open up to consciousness when we talk about that. So, but this is really important. That every area of human endeavor can be approached in creative ways. But the academy kind of squelches that for sure, as I think you were intimating. And there's more and more awareness of this in the academy. It's a challenging thing, but I think we start with just awareness that like virtually every field can be approached with a creativity mindset. And we can start with kind of an awareness of being in the moment. And also, and this is a huge part of creativity, is critiquing the patterns we've inherited from life as a whole, cultural backgrounds, disciplinary backgrounds, the academy, that actually confine our thinking, our awareness to narrower horizons that squelch creativity. Here's something even more precise. There's a very strong tendency in the academy to favor the product, sort of the objective realm. So knowledge that, and of course in the sciences, this is like a huge thing. Expertise in terms of information, in terms of data, in terms of product, when actually there's this whole process dimension that takes a very different kind of thinking. Where it's exciting to me is when these things come together. It's not product versus process. It's integration of the whole thing. The academy errs in the direction, and it's very good at this in a way. I mean, the academy excels in certain ways, but it definitely errs in the direction of product at the expense of process. And as soon as you switch that narrative, then you're starting opening up into the inner awareness that is the realm of consciousness. So ultimately, creativity and consciousness, you can't really talk about one very long without, unless you're going really superficially, without really hitting the other.
And I really want to move on to consciousness in a moment. But I want you to say more about the idea that creativity sort of requires critique of the particular ways that we have been taught to be, that seems to be sort of a fundamental aspect of what it means to create. That is fascinating.
Yeah, and as I might reword it, I might not say creativity requires, but if we're inquiring into creativity, then the critique of the patterns that inhibit creativity would be a part of this endeavor. It's a story of our times in a way, because even before the recent sort of political ordeal that the academy faces, the question that comes up is, how equipped is the academy to prepare individuals to deal with the challenges of our times, for instance, sustainability, political, ideological polarization, a number of things, AI, all of these things we could go down, nuclear proliferation, all the challenges that are facing the future of human civilization are really challenges of creativity, challenges of the academy being able to cultivate a broader awareness of the circumstances we're in. Is a big part of creativity. It's just being in the present and really having an awareness of what are the conditions of the present and then how to deal with those. And so this is kind of looping back to this sort of this aspect of condition patterning. I think the environment is a huge example of, we've inherited condition patterns about how we interact with the environment generally as a species. And we're going to have to really come to terms with how deep that goes, how deep that conditioning goes. And so this is part of that whole creative, critique, that critical interrogation of the patterns that inherit creativity. Because to solve the environmental crisis, we're going to have to tap incredibly deeply into our creative potential to break out of these patterns and establish new relationships. And then I think of creativity in sports. Oh my gosh. More and more now we hear the term creativity applied to the performance of the athlete. And in the business world and in law, like there's this whole wave of in practice of law dealing with improvisation, looking to jazz, guidance in terms of improvisatory creativity in law from jazz. And it's hard to imagine. There's a woman I was on a panel with. I'll think of her name in a second. She's a law professor in British Columbia. Her specialty is jazz and law. She writes academic papers on bebop and law practice. So basically creativity and especially improvisation it's kind of like a wave that's overtaking virtually every field, even fields that seem kind of, you wouldn't think of them as creative fields. Like Carl Weick was a scholar at Michigan. I think he's probably long since retired. One of the major people in studying improvisation in firefighting. Firefighting. And then you can see the application to like first responders, law enforcement, everything. Medicine. When you think about the physician-patient relationship, that's an incredibly improvisatory relationship when the physician is, interacting with the patient and every person has, at some point in time, they're going to have some kind of medical history, even if it's routine checkups, where they're going to come out of that feeling like that was an incredible interaction. And unfortunately, there'll probably be other times when they felt like that physician really did not connect with them at all. Probably the effectiveness of the care they get is going to be really predicated on like you connect with it. It's an improvisation that happens there. So medical schools are even, medical schools had me come in and talk to Tim Johnson, who's a vice president of medical operations, had me come in to talk to his OBGYN class on improvisation. The improvisatory, because it's in the moment. It's like a heightened experience of being in the moment and dealing and drawing on the totality of your expertise, no matter what it is. Law enforcement, firefighting, jazz, ice hockey, basketball. You draw upon the totality of your expertise, but you also have to be free from it. And I love the fact that you mentioned that word play early on and get into the real serious play. And then even science could become a kind of play in a certain way because you tune into the process. And we hear from the great scientists and read their words. Einstein was very famous for, it was intuitive. His discoveries were intuitive more than they were intellectual. They were sort of impulses about the functioning of the structure of reality that he would then give shape to through words and even, I think, there's sort of the mathematical formulation even comes last.
Professor Sarath, would you say, I'm trying to paraphrase your definition of improvisation, is being able to be completely present in the moment, but also being able to tap into all of your expertise and training in whatever field you have, while also being free from sort of the bounds and the confines that field creates?
I love this question. And I have this thing called the artist paradox. So you've got the very thing you're describing, you hit it like perfectly. Because this is elusive. People think of improv, you just do everything you want. It doesn't really take, there takes no skill and all that. And of course, that's a form of improvisation, just sort of, winging it in this sense. That's a stereotype. But the thing is, when you look at high level improvisation, say that happens in music or sports, or again, any discipline among high level practitioners, the stereotype is that, well, they kind of lose touch with their training and all that thing, but it's the opposite. It's like, this is where the paradox is. It's two things that don't seem to go together. You tap into the years and years and years and hours and hours and hours a day of practice and studies. That's how human beings learn. All right. You've got it all in there. If we're not very improvisatory, we're just like automatons. We just kind of regurgitate. But the improvisatory awareness gives us access to the totality, all the rigor and all that kind of thing, as well as this playful freedom to just operate on a moment-to-moment basis, as opposed to being bound by conditioned, almost scripted kind of responses, moment to moment with great freedom. And with the great freedom comes a kind of capacity to penetrate to the inner dimensions of the creative process. It seems contradictory. You've got access to the totality of all the technique, yet also that exquisite freedom from the, this things. And then you go deep in the professions. The expressions are very profound. They come from deep within your psyche, deep within the soul. And the listener, is impacted by this. The listener can feel that where that music is coming from. It's like in deep improvisation, the artist is taking the listener on that journey with them. And I love, like, there's a lot of literature from athletes on this too. And it's like you take away the difference between, improvising in sound and improvising in sport. There's an incredible commonality where they're talking about, they go deep in the moment and there's a fusing between the performers. Okay. So your basketball team, okay, we were functioning as one. 5 basketball players, 5 jazz musicians, we were functioning as one. Especially for the home team, the home crowd. We felt like we were one with our fans. The 5 jazz musicians, we felt like we were one with the listeners. So this collective consciousness is a whole dimension of consciousness when we go into that realm.
So it seems like you have to deeply know and understand your field in order to be able to transcend it. And it is in that transcendence where you're really able to connect with other humans on a really, really human basis rather than sort of just a material rote basis.
I could not have worded it better myself. That's really, really fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so you keep bringing up consciousness and how we must understand it in order to truly understand creativity. Please tell us, what is consciousness?
All right, so now it's like you started with a challenging question. Now it's even more challenging. But this is really where the action is, and it's like a central part of my writing is creativity and consciousness together. Improvisation is the link. I've been saying lately, like, consciousness is the next frontier for humanity. Is not only the next frontier for human education, but it's the next frontier for humanity. The creativity consciousness nexus. Consciousness is like the innermost essence, you might say. We do our best with words here, right? Innermost essence of the human being.
Okay.
And once we get to that level, now we're talking about the soul. And this brings up all questions because the modern academy is actually, it's not a formal doctrine or something like that, but it's largely averse to anything in that direction. And when you look at the intellectual roots of the modern academy, however, I'm talking about the Western academy, the ancient Greek and Roman traditions, philosophical traditions, which was, continuing the basis of, systems of logic and reasoning and critical thinking and all that kind of thing, were rooted in meditation practices and the existence of soul in this area of consciousness. And so the intellectual happened atop of those foundations. And what the academy has done is lopped away. It's lopped off the surface byproduct. So it's like the functioning of the mind at the expense of, this is consciousness, the nature of the mind. So consciousness is kind of like the full spectrum of subjective reality. So a lot of commonly, especially in Eastern literature, the metaphor of the ocean and the waves is used. So the waves are kind of like ordinary functioning, everyday life. We make decisions, we're studying this or that, we're, ingesting information and all that kind of thing. Those are the waves. The ocean is the silent depths of awareness that underlie the waves. And so the game is, can we have both of waves and the ocean together? And so the consciousness revolution is, and this is where meditation practices come in a whole realm of related disciplines, contemplative disciplines that come in, which take awareness. By the way, the philosopher from Yale, I think he's passed away, Pierre Hadot, has been eloquent on this, on elucidating the meditative contemplative foundations of Western philosophy, which the academy has totally flopped about. It's not even in the conversation, to our detriment. But the human being is an ocean of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
We are an ocean of consciousness. In the world's religion, the religious and wisdom, spiritual traditions and philosophical traditions tell us this. Human nature is an ocean of consciousness with surface waves that can be integrated by expanding the epistemological spectrum. That's all. So epistemology dealing with ways of knowing, diverse epistemologies, diverse ways of knowing. And this, unfortunately, in the DEI and the pluralism discourse, this concept has been pushed to the side, because this would have been an opening for really transforming the entire academy through the lens of pluralism, activism, diversity, but it never got there. It never went as deep as it could. So another way of thinking about consciousness is it's kind of like the essential, fundamental self-awareness at the heart of the human being, at the heart of cosmic reality, at the heart of. So there's no distinction between it. When we really go deep into the wisdom traditions, East and West, you find there's like a non-dual relationship between subjective and objective reality. In consciousness is the connecting thread. Now, there's one more thread here. I realize it's a really long answer. It's the risk we take when we go into these realms, right? There's, in consciousness studies, there's different schools of thought on consciousness. So the academy, to the extent it deals with consciousness, is approaching it through a materialist perspective. And basically, that consciousness is basically reducible to the brain. Forget about spirituality or ideas like soul or anything like that. No. And I realize this whole thing is about well-being, but to me, the materialist paradigm. So we have materialism as it manifests in, say, modern society's consumptions, waste, habits, and all that thing. That's materialist, greed, and all that. But also philosophical materialism, which reduces the vision of the human being to a tiny spectrum of what the human being is. These are incredibly egregious impediments to mental health and mental well-being that are not recognized, and they're perpetuated by the academy. This is a story that needs to happen. It needs to take hold in mental health, wellness conversations.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, we at least consist of two parts: the waves and the ocean that creates the waves, right? And oftentimes we get caught up and distracted by sort of the erosion, the friction that the waves cause, and keep our focus at that level. And creativity allows us to tap into the ocean that is the source of the waves. When we tap into that source, we have a deeper understanding of the waves, which then allow us to move past the waves and tap into the ocean. And it is that tapping into that ocean that exists within all of us that allows us to feel and experience the interconnection between ourselves, because the waves can manifest all sort of uniquely and individually. The erosion, the friction, it all looks different on all of our beaches, right? But the sort of intense ocean that is the source of it is universal.
Yeah. And I tell you something, you know what? Brilliant, really. And it's so simple, isn't it? We have the choice. We want to live within a worldview that's bigger or one that's smaller. Many people, their whole life is the waves. They're caught up in the waves. They're not even aware of the ocean. Here's the way I put it. Improvisation, deep improvisation, takes us from the waves to the depths, the silent depths of the ocean, which is, again, it was perfect. That's the source of the waves. And then we have both. And then meditation, so where improvisation proceeds from the waves, takes us from the surface to the depths. Meditation proceeds from the silent depths of the ocean. And then over time, we're able to engage in the turbulence of life with grounding in the silence of pure spirit. So the improvisation is top down. Meditation, and by meditation, I mean, that can apply to a broad range of contemplative spiritual practices and all that kind of thing, goes whole to parts or bottom up. You have a template for a whole new educational, a whole new societal paradigm. I mean, can you imagine if our government were actually like politicians were sort of grounded in this kind of thing and the kind of conversations they could have? I think about that a lot.
What a different world. So it seems as if meditation allows us to more smoothly and easily ride the waves. It's not as if like the waves disappear through a practice of meditation, but it is that we are better able to navigate them as a result. And so you say that, what would it look like for a world where this were our foundation? That leads me to my next question of, why do creativity and consciousness matter? I know we've talked about it, but I'd like to go a little deeper.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to this idea of epistemology, diverse ways of knowing. And the message of this moment is, are we going to continue with a very narrow epistemological scope in the academy, which basically is devoid of creativity and even more devoid of consciousness? Are we going to expand the epistemological scope, reclaim ancient knowledge and contemporary manifestations of it, and combine it with the best? Obviously, a lot of people get snagged on this. They think that we're replacing convention. No, it's like we're combining it with the best of conventional practice. So we have everything. We're going to stick to a narrow model. We're going to expand. And obviously, I don't see how anybody could, although I know that people do, want to cling to the past in the name of rigor, in the name of all the things. But when you look deeper at that kind of things, you realize that rigor is actually not possible without creativity and consciousness. It's a false conception of rigor pervades the academy. So why does it matter? To start with the biggest answer, the future of humanity depends on this shift. Revolution of creativity consciousness. That's sort of the overarching answer. We're at a point where we cannot continue. Future of human civilization does not look that great. And I'm an optimistic person. I'm a very hopeful person, but I'm also realistic. We've come to sort of the end of the line in terms of the current paradigm, socio-educational paradigm, which is quite narrow. A lot of people might feel like, how can you say like this, we're part of a huge university. I mean, just in terms of physical location and everything like that. How could somebody describe this, like incredibly brilliant people? You have fields and subdisciplines, right? A lot of really smart people among the students and the faculty and the staff. All right. How can you say it's narrow? It is narrow. Compared to what it could be and compared to what humanity needs and compared to when we use the creativity consciousness lens, which is grounded in history, it's grounded in psychology, it's grounded in philosophy, it's profoundly grounded in science, we realize that it's narrow. There are interesting studies on collective consciousness. This would be kind of a manifestation of not just individual well-being, wellness, but societal wellness in this sense. There's been interesting studies. I know some that happened in Washington, D.C. during the summer months when crime was at its maximum. And the organizers of the event went to the local authorities, public health authorities, and said, here's our theory. We're going to have something like 5,000 advanced meditators come for a period of 3 weeks. I think it was 3 weeks from all over and engage in this intensive program of practice 7 to 8 hours a day, using specific methods. And our theory is that this practice can enliven, there's a collective field of consciousness to which everyone is connected, not just the meditators, but everyone, all of life and all of creation, really. But we'll say just all of life, and definitely all of a community, all of a society in a metropolitan area is connected, whether they know it or not. It's just part of consciousness. It is collective. And the public officials agreed. The organizer of the meditation project said, if we're right, then we may see decreases in violence, which can be measured, violent crime, accident rates, and illness. And there are several other parameters, but those are the three I remember: accident rates, illness, and that kind of thing. Because if there's more coherence in this collective backdrop to which we're all connected, then this will have a harmonizing influence on day-to-day life. Improvisatory actions, as they manifest in all dimensions. And sure enough, when this came out in a journal, the Journal of Conflict Resolution, which was from Yale, they did not want to publish this because it just defied materialist understanding of how people would think about consciousness and the nature of reality and human connection and all this kind of thing. But sure enough, during that 3-week period, you had a reduction of it, like something like 30%. In those three main parameters. That seems like there were 7 or 8 other parameters: reduction in accident rate, hospital rate, crime rate. And it stayed after the project disbanded because people went back to their homes and their jobs and their families and all that kind of thing. It retained a little bit after that, but then it went back to normal. So thinking is creation of these large meditation groups. This is one example of an intervention, like a paradigmatically new intervention when it comes to societal, and I would say, by extension, individual wellness. And so what I'm hoping happens is that within the wellness movement, which is happening on all campuses, and bravo for your leadership in this, by the way, that we think really expansively about this topic. How could it usher in new paradigms of thinking about the educational process in societal health and flourishing? What a moment for this work, though.
Definitely. If a graduate student here, Professor Sarath, were interested in exploring their creativity and their consciousness more deeply, where would they go? What should they do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So on campus, we have the Program in Creativity and Consciousness Studies. So there's a website. We're going to update it. I think there's some listings of courses that deal with this kind of thing, but definitely in the jazz department, we have some really great classes. Professor Martha Travers is doing most of the teaching now. I founded this area a number of years ago, and I usually like teach 1 or 2 classes a year. And they could just look for classes with the creativity consciousness or some kind of related title. I would recommend they check out different meditation centers in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor is like a hotbed for that kind of thing. It has been for many years. I think between those two things, I think there's some good things to draw from.
Thank you. Are there any other resources that you could share that could help us better navigate our creativity and our consciousness?
There's organizations like the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, that was founded by the astronaut Edgar Mitchell way back in the 70s to explore all the kind of things we're talking about, the further dimensions of consciousness, the post-materialist paradigm. And of course, his contribution, he's somebody from the science, he's somebody who has scientific credibility, but issued even decades ago in IONS is about this Institute of Noetic Sciences, challenging this scientific materialist paradigm that basically pervades academies like ours. There's the California Institute of Integral Studies. Maharishi International University both of those offer graduate students in consciousness-related degrees, including at the doctoral level that are fully accredited. California Institute of Human Science. I happen to be part of the society. I'm on the board for the Society of Your Consciousness Studies. So there's a number of organizations like this. They have conferences. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I have a final question. So, creativity is often portrayed to be quite binary and happenstance. Either I'm feeling creative or I'm not. I've either got it or I don't. How can someone intentionally tap into their creativity?
Yeah, this is a really good one. And I think, one is it's just adopting a creative headset in terms of whatever one does. Be in the moment in life as a whole, and definitely in your field, even if people are not thinking about your particular field, like it's just been engineering or something like that, or some area like you hit this quite nicely in the sciences. That's like really hardcore information or something like that. There's still creativity that can happen. But probably more important is expand your epistemological scope in terms of the things you do every day. Like everyone could partake of the arts in some way or another. Again, like our creativity and consciousness coursework, which engages, I think the art school has some kind of creativity class also, engages, students in creative activities. So if you're in the sciences, sociology or something like that, or cultural studies, you can engage and make creative activity, creative engagement part of your daily or certainly weekly schedule of events, and definitely meditation practice. And you're actually expanding not only your engagement in the waves, as we were saying, in the ocean, tap into that ocean. At the Maharishi in the university, there's a saying that's like meditate and create,
Mm.
hit the depths of the ocean, then plunge into activity.
Okay.
That may be
Okay.
a good way of summing up the project.
Okay. Meditate and create. And I want to make sure that we're clear. By create, it could be anything, right? We don't have to go and paint an elaborate, extravagant painting or sculpt the next famous sculpture.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think it's important, one, to expand the narrative on creativity, so it's not just the arts.
Mm.
'Cause a lot of people have this thing. It's like the arts are about creativity. Nothing, no business is definitely not about creativity, and that's limiting. On the other hand, the question is, can we take it too far and kind of lose sight of what the arts bring to creativity, like finding a grain of truth in this, at least in the stereotype? And I just say, yes, we can take it too far.
Okay, so with that understanding that our creation and our creative abilities are not trapped within within the field of the arts, like it's so often sort of portrayed. I guess the doctrine or the call to meditate and create could be like meditate and write, even like for your dissertation, meditate and play in the grass with kids, with your partner, meditate and firefight, right? What creativity is, I think we need to expand that boundary within ourselves. And then that will really open up a lot of opportunity for us to be able to tap into it as a result.
No, I think that's really it's really tying it up really nicely.
Okay, wonderful. Professor Sarath, thank you so much. I have grown so deeply from this conversation, and I am truly grateful. Thank you.
Bravo to you. And let's keep in touch. Let's keep this conversation going.
Yes, I look forward to it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sam.
Okay, here are 3 takeaways from this week's episode for your well-being journey. 1, creativity means to critique and to transcend the current bounds of our fields, our industries, and our lives. Expanding into our potential as humans and as scholars means that we must see the work that we do here in grad school as a creative process. 2, because the work that we do as grad students is a creative process, when we focus our attention only on that end product, we limit what we're able to create during our time here. However, when we can tap into both product and process, we get so much more out of our experience. And 3, the disconnection with consciousness at the individual and collective level is harmful to our mental health. So tapping into our creativity is not optional, it's a necessity. Making creative engagement a part of our daily lives and expanding where we see creativity as a possibility will allow us to do so with much more ease. Check out our website for all the resources Professor Sarath mentioned and more at rackham.umich.edu/Gradwell. You can reach out to Professor Sarath with any questions you have at sarahara, SARAHARA @umich.edu. You can contact us about the podcast at rackhampdeworkshops@umich.edu. And make sure to join us next time when I speak with Kat Nick, Senior Disability Access Coordinator for grad students here at Michigan, about getting our needs met both inside and outside of accommodations. I'll see you then. Hey, hardworking grad student. Thank you for tuning into Gradwell. I hope you can take something away from this episode with you. If you like what you heard, be sure to write a review, like, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, check us out on social at UMich Grad School.